Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our plenary session titled The History of Cyber Diplomacy Future, Drawing Insights from Collaborative Progress on Trade, Nuclear, and Climate. Our moderator is John Defterius, former CNN Emerging Markets Editor and Anchor. Our speakers are His Excellency Adel al-Jubeir, Saudi Arabia's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, member of the Council of Ministers, and envoy for climate affairs. Pascal Lamy, former Director General of World Trade Organization, WTO, and Vice President, Paris Peace Forum. His Excellency Ambassador Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary, India. John, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the terrific turnout. Gentlemen, please sit down. It's great to have you. This is an incredibly important session, and I think we can frame it in the context of is the past prologue for what we want to try to achieve at the Global Cybersecurity Forum annual meeting in 2024, but very importantly, the evolution of the GCF Institute itself as a global institution to set the frameworks. We see a lot of work done by multilateral institutions, but we had a brief conversation in the modulus beforehand about the resistance to multilateralism, if you will. It's not fashionable anymore, particularly in Western democracies or within the developed economies. Many of them think that they haven't benefited from globalization, therefore there's a resistance to change. But we have three terrific guests that have been involved in nuclear non-proliferation, the creation of the World Trade Organization and the coverage of the final Uruguay round that completed and led to the WTO, the role of India in nuclear, but very importantly, finishing off here in the climate debate, we have the Kingdom's climate envoy. And we're going to make comparisons to what we've achieved in the past and how it may be different with cybersecurity. Can we give them a warm welcome to the GCF annual meeting, please? Your Excellency, Mr. al-Jubeir, it's great to have you back at the GCF. I know they're greatly appreciative that you can share your insights, particularly on a session like this. I thought it was very pertinent to bring back to the fore His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman's statement that he released on the opening of the annual meeting. And I'll just quote a little bit of it, but he said that cyberspace is closely linked to the growth of economies, the prosperity of societies, the security of individuals, and the stability of nations, which I thought was incredibly accurate. The cross-border nature of cyberspace means that it's increasingly important to harmonize international efforts to seize the opportunities it offers, and face the challenges it presents by investing in people. And briefly, in our discussion just now, you were saying, cyber is more complex. As a climate envoy, you could see the emitters. You could take action on the national level, get regional buy-in, and then international buy-in, right? From the Paris Agreement and even the UAE consensus. Candidly, what do you think are the challenges in cyberspace that some of these other pillars like trade and nuclear non-proliferation offer, in your view?
I think to begin with, we must ensure that we don't take it for granted. As His Royal Highness pointed out, it's all-encompassing. Whether it's our cell phones, our emails, our banking, our communications with our doctors, whether it's businesses, whether it's governments, whether it's air traffic control, whether it's electricity, water, it's all connected to the internet and cybersecurity. The difference between cyber and other issues like trade, for example, is with trade and with the environment or pollution, we can identify individuals or entities that are responsible for it, and we can pursue them through national laws, or we can pursue them through international laws or international agreements. With cyber, we could have a situation where a young person in a dorm room somewhere can wreak havoc on a country's electricity system, on banking system, defense system. So it's not quite as clear-cut as we have in the other areas. So this is more of a challenge with cybersecurity. But the key here, I believe, is education. What are the threats? What are the complications? What can be done in terms of national laws? What can be done in terms of regional agreements, international agreements? And how do we convince everybody or countries of the need to work collaboratively in order to move towards a common vision? So it will take time, but we need to try to accelerate that time, and we need to make sure that we have in place mechanisms that protect all of us.
Great. We have plenty to talk about, and we have about 23 minutes, and it's fascinating. I think, Mr. Lamy, it'd be really interesting to share your insights as the Director General of the WTO, and I remember covering you in the final negotiations to create the WTO. In my opening comments, I said multilateralism is not fashionable anymore. How do we reset that when the world's facing so much disruption at the same time, and then we're coming in with artificial intelligence, quantum computing? We're not stopping with innovation, but the policies around cyber governance. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yes, of course. Looking back, I think the WTO was created in a very different world than the one we live in now. And any lesson we can draw from what was done since the Second World War between sovereign states, institutions, treaties, what you call multilateralism, has to morph. And in this cyberspace, the problems, the actors, the issues are very different, much more complex. And my own answer to your question is that classical multilateralism, i.e. interaction between sovereign, the sort of what diplomats call the Westphalian system, is not fit for purpose in a cyber world. The risks we have to face are many, from infrastructures to cybercrime to intrusion to even cyber warfare. And the actors are not just states. When you look at what's happening, one can even say from time to time that non-state actors are having a higher impact on the cyberspace, whether it's big digital companies, whether it's hackers, sort of mercenaries who belong to nowhere, but who can be pretty effective. So the lesson for me is that we have to move to something which I call more polylateral than multilateral.
Polylateral.
Polylateral, meaning you need a different setup of actors around the table. Of course, states, they, in many cases, remain the holder of the norm, of the standard, of the rule, of the commitment. But we need other actors to step in. And if I had a model for that, in the existing system, I would combine the Global Fund Against HIV/AIDS and the International Civil Aviation Organization. The ICAO, I think, gives us a clear indication of how can a serious risk be standardized all over the world. Planes work with systems which are totally standardized, totally interoperable. And the Global Fund on HIV/AIDS mixes philanthropy, states, experts, academics, non-governmental organizations. And that's a bit the model we are trying to put forward with the Paris Peace Forum. I mean, purpose-led coalitions that will not address the whole of the cyberspace. I agree with you, Minister. It's so complex that you probably have to slice the problems, but you have to do it, again, in a polylateral rather than just multilateral way.
Great. Okay. Ambassador Saran, it's great to have you back. I think this is your third GCF, and it's a delight to have you. You were involved as a former foreign minister with the nuclear treaties, and I think to the point of as Minister of State of Foreign Affairs here in the Kingdom, that was pretty definable because people knew the number of weapons and the objectives, couldn't get all signatories, and then there was a consensus. How would you apply that experience to cyber today? Because there is a common good here. I think in the statement by His Royal Highness, he suggested the common good for economies. And I almost think in the context, if you're going to be an investor into a country, for example, and you know they have a robust cyber network, that's a positive tick. How can we get to that level in cybersecurity? And Minister, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Please.
Thank you very much, and very happy to be here for the third time. I would like to make the point that while there are certain parallels in terms of the multilateral approaches that we had in the past, say to the nuclear issue or climate change that His Excellency was also involved in. I think what we have to recognize is that cyber is a somewhat different kind of animal. One, I think the pace of change that is taking place is so rapid that you are constantly, the states, whether they are doing it in terms of their domestic laws or in terms of international law, you are always playing catch up. It's because of the speed of change that is taking place. Second, here you have a technology which is, in fact, in the nature of what I would call a multiplicator. That is, it has an impact across various domains. So it is not only dealing with cyber, but how cyber gets linked to, say, nuclear, how does it get linked to various other aspects of defense or offense. You have a question of trust. If you have a mobile telephone in your hand which might explode tomorrow like the pagers did in Lebanon, what do you do in terms of trying to regulate that kind of activity? So I think we should take some lessons from the nuclear field or the climate change field. For example, in the nuclear field, you have, say, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Is it possible to think in terms of something similar for cyber? You have in climate change an international or intergovernmental panel on climate change, which brings together scientists from all across the world who look at what the best science tells you in terms of the challenge which you are facing and in terms of how you should respond to it. Could we think in terms of having something similar for, say, cyberspace? That it gives you constantly, the policymakers, but even civil society, gives you the best that science can tell you with regard to the nature of the challenge which you are facing and what are the ways in which you can deal with this challenge. So there are certain parallels, but I would end again by saying that I think we also have to recognize that the nature of this challenge is somewhat unprecedented, is somewhat different from what we have faced before.
Yeah, and behind the scenes, as the minister was saying, you have some small actors that perhaps are collaborating with state actors, right, and deploying technologies and even the ransomware, which is a huge challenge. Just as a reminder to our audience, when I was involved with the GCF going back 3 years ago, the estimated impact on global GDP was just over $2 trillion. And by the end of 2025, we're looking at $10 trillion, right? And it's growing at such a rapid pace. I see the investment into the sector is going up as well. Minister al-Jubeir, I'd like to tie in the thoughts we heard from Pascal Lamy and Ambassador Saran as well about the role of Saudi Arabia. And I say this because I know there was an effort by the UK to be the regulatory hub of AI. And they were trying to get the support of President Biden, which they gave. But a very senior executive who was of Chinese origin told me there is no way China would agree to have the regulatory body based in the UK, right? And it brings up the point of the GCF Institute and the kingdom itself as an independent, kind of honest arbiter of perhaps cyberspace itself. Leaning to the east, your partnerships, to the west, your partnerships, and very much the developing world, which is very important for stability and for opportunity in Africa, for example. I don't want to overplay it, but do you see that neutrality coming to bear in the structure that Ambassador Saran is talking about, to have an independent core body that can serve as an honest broker, if you will?
Why not? But this is really up to the international community. Saudi Arabia is committed to this area. You mentioned the issue of risk. When investors look at countries, they look at cybersecurity has become now one of the main, if not the main issue. Would you invest in a country in which your data is not safe? Would you invest in a country in which you cannot use your cell phone? Would you invest in a company in which you cannot use the internet safely? Of course not. So this is an incentive for countries to do something about enhancing and protecting their networks. This is number one. Number two, I think there are areas that can be used in order to build confidence. And that confidence helps us work better with each other. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince launched 2 initiatives, one on the protection of children and one on the empowerment of women. I don't believe anyone on this globe can not appreciate and support the importance of protecting our children from evil on the internet. And I don't believe anyone on the world is going to be opposed to anything that empowers and enhances women and their contribution to society, whether it's economic, social, or otherwise. So these can be used to build confidence. And as we build confidence, we exchange experience. And as we exchange experience, we learn. And we recognize the need to try to codify. And we begin to build, step by step, the framework that is needed in order to get to the point where we have a universal laws and universal procedures that govern the cyberspace and that protect it and that minimize the ability of outsiders to do damage to it.
Okay. And that role, even of the GCF Institute, which is now an independent body, right? And it's a global body. Do you see this bridge building coming from Saudi Arabia and cybersecurity, if I can be frank?
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is all about bridge building. Just look at our geographic location. We sit between 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. Our involvement in the global energy markets, our involvement in the global financial markets, Mecca and Medina, our connection to 1.8 billion people around the world of the Islamic faith. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia sent 600,000 of its young men and women to study all over the world. They came back to Saudi Arabia, and they're here now, and they act as bridges. They are bridges, they don't act as bridges, between us and virtually and most countries around the world. Our policy and our approach has always been about connectivity. Connectivity, whether it's in terms of the major sea lanes in our proximity, the Straits of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, whether it's air traffic above the Arabian Peninsula, whether it's where we sit. So we are part of the world. What happens in one part of the world impacts us. And we, as a consequence, are aware of the responsibilities on us, and we're aware of the opportunities it provides for everybody. The more bridges we build, the more connectivity we have, whether that connectivity is shipping, whether it's data lines, whether it's cyber, whether it's thought connectivity. We are cognizant of that, the importance of Saudi Arabia, and we want to be a responsible member of the international community like we have over the past 7 or 8 decades. So we play this role, and we take this very seriously, and I believe the Institute, the forum that we have today is a testament to this. It is unique in putting together all the challenges that we face with regards to cyber and cybersecurity. It is unique in bringing together experts from different fields to discuss these issues, and I believe in many ways it has been groundbreaking in expanding the discussion about this area, broadening it and deepening it. And so for that, I want to give those who work on this effort a lot of credit.
I actually think that needs an applause because you recognize the work of the GCF. I mean, congratulations, actually, to the governor. If we can give a nice round of applause, that's a major recognition, I think, of the progress that's been made, actually. I've seen it over the last 3 years. It's
Yes.
quite extraordinary. Director General, I think you'd be the perfect person, and I think Ambassador Saran would be great to address this. If you say it's of economic importance and political importance for development, and I know you wrestled with this within the WTO, how do we make sure, even in a context of a G20 structure, a UN structure broader, that the developing world's not left behind here? Because they've been hit by a massive pandemic, they were late to get vaccines, and everybody always says, oh, I think they'll make their way. But again, as we talked about, cyber doesn't know boundaries. And how do we do that more effectively this time? And I welcome everybody's comments on this. It's a vital issue.
No, I think it's a fundamental issue. We live, unfortunately, now in a world which is fragmented, scattered, polarized by the main US-China rivalry that's behind all these issues. And we have a climate fracture, and we risk to have a cyber fracture. So if you add to these big East-West tensions more North-South tensions, the world 10, 20 years from now will be even worse than today. And I can tell you, I've been in this international business for about 35 years, it's much worse today than it was 30 years ago. So you're absolutely right. This North-South dimension needs to be part of the conversation, not least because today, and we just heard that also, the huge capacity difference between those who are at the frontier of technology and a large number of developing countries who do not have the state capacity. This is absolutely crucial, and I believe, and this is where I totally agree with what Minister al-Jubeir was saying, it's probably...
We're just going to give you a handheld mic so it doesn't cut out. Thank you.
It's probably in the hands of emerging countries that can bridge this North-South fracture. That
the ones that are more developed than they were in
absolutely,
the last 20
because
years.
Both sides will trust them more than their pals, in a way. So I totally agree with that. We know what we need in terms of international governments. We need norms, we need standards, we need verification procedures, we need transparency, we need commitments, but not just by states, also by non-state actors. And this is why something like the Global Cybersecurity Forum can help in being the sort of hub where these discussions, these progress, which, as you rightly said, take place in the UN, in the G7, the Hiroshima process, in the G20, there is a need for a hub that connects these actors, these elements of governance, and I think these purpose-led coalitions, which is why, listening to you this morning, I think some sort of connection between the Paris Peace Forum, whose savoir-faire is on the incubation of these purpose-led coalitions, and the GCF might make sense.
It does seem to make sense, because I noticed in the Peace Forum that cyber is on the table. Ambassador Saran, I'd like to have you address two issues in one here, because I know you feel quite passionate about private-public partnerships. A lot of times they don't work, and it's a lot of discussion with no action. You think it can be different. And the other one you talked about is institutionalization, and it's a complicated word, but you're basically suggesting the multilateral organizations need to be more sensitive to the developing world. They have to have stake in the game. The bigger players like China, India, Saudi Arabia, a more say in the governance at the World Bank, IMF, WTO. That would make a difference in cyber, in your view?
So two aspects. One is that the technology that we are dealing with essentially lies with 4 or 5 major multinational companies, tech companies. We are very fond of saying multi-stakeholder approach. That is, we need a public-private partnership in order to be able to deal with this particular challenge. The danger here is that, the objectives and intent of the state on the one hand, which really works for the welfare of people, and those of commercial entities whose main objective is profit making. Now, to my mind, even if we are talking about the need to bring in the private sector into any kind of an approach to deal with this problem, the state must remain in the driving seat.
The state should be.
The state should be in the driving seat. It should not be a backseat passenger telling the driver, please don't go very fast, it'll be dangerous, but the driver is looking at other, cars which are there on the road, trying to overtake him. So what happens is that, like the AI generative, technology, it is a half-baked kind of technology which has been put out in the open domain before all the guardrails which are necessary have been put in place. So I think we have to recognize that there are limits to this multi-stakeholder approach. Bottom line, state must remain in the driving seat. That is one point. Second point is with regard to capacity building. I think the good news is that today, actually, there is greater diffusion of these technologies than perhaps in the past. I mean, our host country itself is a good example because I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the Global Security Index, it is number 1 or very close to number 1. So the capacities are there in several other major emerging economies, and I'm proud to also, include my own country in that respect. So there is a capacity which is available much more democratically, in a sense, than was the case in the past. So there is, in the UN, for example, there is a proposal for having a network, capacity network, which combines together the efforts of all different centers of excellence across the world, whether they are in the West or we are in the developing countries, to be able to work together to bring about that capacity development. So I think that's something positive that is happening. But I would also make the point that, in terms of the multilateral approaches, geopolitics counts, unfortunately. So you have today a highly polarized geopolitical environment. You have a very contentious kind of a geopolitical environment. And to think that you can perhaps isolate cybersecurity sphere from this global competition is simply not realistic. So I think what you can do is to try and see whether we can, despite this contestation, can we manage this space at least? At least agree upon those areas where there is a common interest. I think yesterday you heard people talking about, the importance of protecting children, the importance of gender equality. Those are areas where perhaps it may be easier to get an international consensus than perhaps on some of the bigger issues that we are talking about. So maybe a degree of modesty in terms of, approaching these issues, and not hope that by just rhetoric alone we will get any results. I think some practical work is required.
Yeah, I think what you said about the cart and the horse, who's leading it here? Because I think we have thoroughbreds in technology that are driving and governments lag. It's really impressive. You could say the same about,
by the way, just
data collection, social media, etc.
Just to add that, this is a technology which is giving you the potential for leapfrogging. Leapfrogging in a manner that perhaps with some of the earlier technologies was not possible. So I think that potential also should be kept in mind.
Good. We have run out of time, but I wanted to ask a final question to you, Your Excellency, and that is the agility of government, which is interesting, because what we're talking about here is linking intelligence, security, military, your telecom structure, right, and business. Yes. And do you want to take it through the prism of the kingdom and its 2030 plans? But how do you pull those together in a faster way? In the United States, we caught some last-minute tampering with water systems because the intelligence community was linked up with Homeland Security. What would you suggest the kingdom's doing and the example it could serve in terms of government agility to keep pace with innovation in private sector?
It's very simple. If you're not nimble and fast, you're going to lose. the technology is moving so rapidly, and it's as His Excellency pointed out, the diffusion of it is so quickly. If you compare it to what was called the new International Information Order in the 60s, which dealt with band waves with regards to radio and television frequencies, there was a limit on how much bandwidth you have. And there was a huge discussion between the North and the South about, you're crowding out the space, we don't have space to broadcast, you need to give us some space. And in the North, they were saying, sorry, we're already here, we're not going to give it to you. So you're handicapped. You don't have that issue with cyber, and you don't have that issue with the internet. The possibilities are endless. The ability, when you look in the past and you have call centers in countries, people would outsource them, they create jobs, and they create spin-off industries. It's much easier now with cyber to be able to 3D something in another country. And so the ability to bring jobs and technology to the rest of the world is tremendously enhanced. But it's not going to come to you if you don't have a legal framework, if you don't have a secure network, if you don't have a government that is comprehensive in terms of connecting all the elements that need to be connected so that you don't have gaps in the system. Because one little opening somewhere can wreak havoc on your system. But you need to be comprehensive. And what we have done in Saudi Arabia, when you look at Vision 2030, it's very comprehensive, and it involves economics, it involves social reforms, it involves quality of life, it involves, and under each of these headlines are many, many different initiatives. So it's very comprehensive because you want to make sure that you move positively forward in all areas. And the same applies with regards to cyber. You cannot leave something unattended. It has to be comprehensive. And to go back to my first point, if you're not quick on your feet, if you're not comprehensive, you're going to lose, and you're going to forfeit opportunities. And so, but the ability to move quickly and be comprehensive is much easier in this space than it would be in manufacturing in the past or in other areas in the past. So I'm very optimistic that we can get there, but the key is to get globally everybody to think in terms of baselines, in terms of code of conduct, in terms of areas that we all agree on that we can work on in order to build towards the objective outcome that we finally want to achieve.
Good. I'm not too surprised, but what an excellent panel. It's great to see you back at the Global Cybersecurity Forum annual meeting. Director General, great to see you again, and thank you for the work in the Peace Forum that you suggested as well. I know you're very involved in the climate structure and oceans, so thanks. Ambassador Saran, always a pleasure, and I appreciate the phone calls ahead of time where he strategizes his great ideas, so my mind's prepared for this. Governor Maized, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for convening such a great panel. Round of applause for the group. Thank you very, very much. Superb, actually, as always. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.